quick time, quick time. We don't have much time, so we got to go quick time. Quick time. So it's 3:34. 3:34. And hello, Bear. And I want to try to have this up on my podcast feed by 4 p.m. It's really just a deal I make with myself, truthfully. So, what's up, Clark? So if it's not, whatevs. But I try to want to keep myself to that. Did I share it? No, it didn't share it. Quick reminder before I kick this off. To subscribe to the actual podcast via iTunes, via whatever podcast app you use. And what that means is opening up your podcast app, which if you have an iPhone, just type in podcast and it'll come up. Search Spaniard, click subscribe. Hey, Aaron, I'm going to put you on the spot to do this, my friend. To subscribe to the show by searching us out on iTunes, click and subscribe. Spaniard Show. That easy, simple 10. Booyah. Alright, let's see here. Gonna kick off today's AMXkids with Where the Red Fern Grows. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love this book. It's about dogs. It's about being a boy and figuring stuff out. And how relevant is that to pretty much all of us? If you're a girl, figuring stuff out, same thing, boy or a girl. So we are, what was I going to do? I was going to post something, I think. So we're going to dive into this. Where the Red Fern Grows, it was highly recommended on the show. I read it, I'm sure, but I don't really remember reading it. But I think I may have shed a tear reading this book because it talks about dogs. Think when you were a boy or a girl, your childhood dog. Think about that. How freaking, great was that, Just figuring it out, crying to your little dog, trying to figure out life's challenges and obstacles. All right, here we go. So this AMXkids, a reminder, after this is done, I'll be uploading this to my podcast feed so you can re-listen to this whenever, wherever you want. Subscribe, Spaniard Show on iTunes. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Hello, my young friends, and welcome to the Spaniard Show. This is AMXkids 19. We're diving for the second straight week into the book Where the Red Fern Grows. I was just telling Facebook Live, this book makes me smile. It makes me smile because it brings me back to childhood, which is such a confusing time. Look, if you're a kid, I know it's confusing. We all know it's confusing. I want to let you in on a little secret. I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. It doesn't get any less confusing. So just accept, right? Just accept confusion as the norm, because that's the truth of the situation. And I want to give you a true story. So this is from yesterday. And this is why, my young friends, I'm encouraging you at a very young age to develop the habit, employ the habit of lifelong learning, especially that of reading books. Because look, when I do things, I like to try to I like to bet on myself, okay? That's not to say you have to do it all the time, but my mindset is, okay, I need a habit that I can employ without having to spend a lot of money, without having to depend on a lot of other people, without having to depend on the weather, without having to depend on a ride here or there, whatever. I need something that I can do that I know is going to help make me feel good. Reading is that. Yesterday, look, I'm building a show. I'm building AMXkids. I pursue goals my whole life. It's difficult. It's tough, and you get down. So true story, yesterday, I just felt down. It seemed like it wasn't going well. You just do all this work, and it's not paying off. Sports competition, no matter what it is, it can seem overwhelming and daunting. So I went to my little spot at Panera, got myself a little coffee. I sat down, and I started reading a book. And I'm currently reading this book, Where the Red Fern Grows, as well as Mr. Rogers' book. So Mr. Rogers, which is modern day, it's developed into Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. So if you remember Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, that originally came from a show and a man named Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers. And I read that book, and I kid you not, after about an hour of reading, I thought to myself, dang, I feel really good. So that's it. That's why I want you to buy into this idea of lifelong learning. That's why I want you to buy into this idea, this habit, this lifestyle of learning and asking questions and ordering books and reading books and going to the library. Look, my daughter, I'm on a little bit of a rant here, but I'll get into the book soon, I promise. My daughter just had an Oktoberfest party at her school. We went, and they had like used books on sale for, I bought 5 tickets for $1, and we could get 5 books. That's like 20 cents a book. Go out there, find a way to get the books. If money is an obstacle, free libraries. They have the books. Whether it's these books that I'm teaching on the show, whether it's other books, just find something that interests you and start reading, my friends. Diving into the book Where the Red Fern Grows. So at the beginning of the book, early on, the main character of the book, Billy Colman, right? Pretty much at the beginning of the book, he tells us, so he's speaking, the book starts with him as a grown-up, and he's speaking to us as a grown-up, right? So I'm reading this, grown-up to a grown-up, and he says to us this. He's referring to his current day. He says this, quote, "It was one of those days when a man feels good. One of those rare days when everything is right and nothing is wrong." So I started thinking about this. It was one of those days when a man feels good. One of those days when everything is right and nothing is wrong. You know, youngsters, kids, young adults, whatever age you are, growing up is a funny thing. So as a kid, right now, you're a kid, you're a youngster, you're I don't know, maybe you're a young adult, maybe you're a teen, maybe you are a little kid. But the deal is, you don't know what you don't know. What does that mean? You don't know what you don't know. Well, that sounds pretty obvious, Spaniard. Of course I don't know what you don't know. But what I'm saying is, as a young kid, you have all these visions for what it's going to be like when you're older. You have a vision of what your job might be like, what your family might be like, what your neighborhood or your house or your vacation. You have this vision, but you just don't know. And kind of what I alluded to at the beginning of this episode is, as an adult, you don't know either. You're always just figuring stuff out. You never have it all figured out, ever. So when Billy is telling us, and I'm reading, when he says it was one of those rare days when a man feels good, one of those rare days when everything is right and nothing is wrong. Accept the fact, I alluded to this, I talked about this at the beginning of this episode, accept the fact that a lot of difficult things are going to happen. Period. There's no other way around it. Difficult things will happen, and it's up to you, and it's up to me, and it's up to everyone else to not give in to those things. It's so very easy to give in to the tough days and allow them to define you. When I was a professional fighter, maybe I would lose, maybe I would get knocked out, actually get knocked out, maybe I'd get kicked in the face, maybe I'd get elbowed, maybe I would get fired from my job of professional fighting. And at times, I started to give in to that negative feeling that, oh, this is so tough, and it made me kind of like a bitter person. And I'm encouraging you to fight that. Fight that feeling. That's too easy. Look, if you're listening to this show, if you're listening to AMXkids, if you're reading these books, if you're really trying to learn from this, I know that you're not going to give in. I know that you're not going to go down that negative path and let that define you. Look, very rarely is everything right. Nearly never. You know how many professional fights I've had where everything was perfect? Where everything was right? You know how many days I have when everything... It's a rarity. It's a blessing. But understand that very rarely will those days happen. And everything is a choice. Everything is a choice. You must choose every single day to fight for the good. You must choose every single day to not accept defeat. You must choose every single day to not let the negative or the bad or the difficult days define you as a person. And you got to fight tooth and nail to keep that spirit alive. And as I said earlier, to circle this back to what the story I just told about going to Panera and reading a book, how do you do that? You find a good book and you get lost in that book. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you a small victory. That's going to give you a small sense of well-being, a small sense of goodness. And then you're going to catapult that to another book or another lesson. Or you're going to learn something in that book. Maybe that's going to help you do something that's going to help make you feel better. Maybe you're going to take something from that book and help another person. Maybe you're reading a fitness book, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Maybe that's going to cause you to do an exercise and you're going to feel good about yourself. And that's the beginning. And that, my friends, is what we build off of. Moving on to the next point. So Billy is referring to an old pup that he found. So he finds an old pup meandering around. And he has this interaction with this dog. And at the end, he decided, you know what, I'm going to usher this dog on its way. And he says this, as the dog was leaving, quote, "To him it made no difference how long the road, or how rough or rocky. His old feet would keep jogging along, on and on, mile after mile. There would be no crying or giving up." Think about that. I'm going to read that slowly, and I want you to put yourself into these words. Put yourself into these sentences. So this dog is going on its way, right? The dog doesn't know where he's going. Billy doesn't know where he's going. The dog chanced upon Billy, and Billy chanced upon the dog, and now they're going their separate ways. Billy says of the dog, "To him it made no difference how long the road, or how rough or rocky. His old feet would keep jogging along, on and on, mile after mile. There would be no crying or giving up." So I read that and it struck me, and I wrote it down in my notebook, and I wanted to bring it to the show. Why? There's two things that I want to point out here. First and foremost is I cry a lot. So I don't know if I think Billy is speaking figuratively. If you don't know what that means, that'd be a good time to hit pause and look up that word figuratively. I think he's speaking figuratively, okay? But I wanted to clarify, kids, that I cry a lot. And if you cry a lot, it's okay. Period. Because I cry a lot. But secondly, take that message, the long, rough, rocky road, but there's no quit. Let me tell you something. That's as important a decision. Remember earlier when we were talking about choices, to see the good, to not settle for the bad, to not get sucked into the negative and the bad? That idea, never giving up, that's as important a decision that you can ever make. No matter what, don't give up. In any obstacle or challenge that you face in your life, young or old, I'm not sure, and trust me, I study books, I watch documentaries, I listen to very smart people talk. Consider over 1,000 or more than several thousand pieces of content, whether it's an interview or a book that I've consumed. And I can tell you from all that study and reflection that quite possibly the most important thing, habit, decision that you can make, no matter what you encounter, is to not stop, to never give up. That single thing could quite possibly be the most important thing that you can remember, take away from this episode, and quite possibly every episode that I've ever recorded. Just keep going. Don't stop. And lastly, I want to circle back to the idea of exercise. So our character, now when he's reliving his boyhood, or he takes us to his boyhood, he tells us about where he lives, and he lives in the Ozark Mountains in Oklahoma. And he describes his home life as very rural, rural being another good vocab word there, being very rural, out in the country, mountains, woods, animals, not a lot of, at this time especially, not a lot of technology. If you remember him, you've been following along since I read the book Hatchet. It reminds me a lot of the woods that our main character was living, that Brian was living in, that Brian was stranded in, right? He's really out there, really in the woods. So Billy's telling us about the Ozark Mountains, and he says this: "It was the most beautiful place in the whole wide world, and I took advantage of it all." Later on, when he's describing his dogs, okay? So imagine that. It was the most beautiful place in the whole wide world, and I took advantage of it all. So to me, when I'm reading that, my imagination is running wild, and I'm thinking, okay, he lives in the country, describes the mountains and the trees and the rivers, and I'm thinking I took advantage of it all. Okay, that means he's adventurous. He's running through the woods. He's jumping. He's climbing trees. He's building forts. He's digging holes. He's kind of maybe watching the animals, scouting, maybe hunting, right? He's growing up. That's his upbringing. And I absolutely love that imagery in my mind. I think it's awesome. I think it's fun. I think it's the point, truly, of being alive. I don't want to get too deep on you here, but then later on, when he's describing his dogs, he says this: "In my dogs, I had not only the power, but the brains along with it." So Billy has two dogs. One is really smart, and one is really strong and powerful. So he said to himself, "In my dogs, I not only had the power, but the brains along with it." So the message that I want you to take away from this section is this: build your body and mind. Your body and your mind, that's your tool. That's your tool for life. That's your tool for accomplishing any goal that you set for yourself. That's your tool for overcoming every obstacle and challenge that you encounter in your life. And the healthier and sharper your mind and body are, the better equipped, the more well equipped you're going to be to accomplish those things. A strong mind and body will help you in absolutely every area of life. But here's the thing: it takes work. You know, when I read these books and I talk about these books every day, to be honest, I'm reading and prepping and recording at least 2 hours a day for the last, I don't know, 700, 800 days. It's a lot of work. But I can tell you, the sharpness of my mind and the strength of my body from training helps me in every single thing that I encounter. It's bringing me closer to my goals, and it's getting me through my obstacles and challenges. So again, I want you to consider, from the beginning of this book, consider this idea of lifelong learning. Consider this idea of reading books, asking questions, filling your mind with productive, positive thoughts and things that are going to, pieces of knowledge and wisdom that are going to help you, going to take you closer to your goals. Add in some exercise, add in some exploration, add in some training, and you will be developing yourself as Billy's dogs. The power and the brains to go with it, my friends. And that, to me, is a perfect combination. Hope you enjoyed this week's AMX Kids reading the book Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. You can get this book as well as every other book, as well as help support the show. You can get them all and help support the show at charliespaniard.com/reading list. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. So it's very helpful to me, and I would love it if you would consider subscribing to the podcast. It's going to help us grow. It's going to help us spread this idea of lifelong learning. It's going to help us spread the love of books, the love of wisdom, the love of reading and growing our mind and our bodies. If you go to any podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you're using, Android and or Apple, search out Spaniard Show, click subscribe. AMX Kids comes out every Tuesday. AMX, where I do what I just did, I AMX. Grown-up books. We have interviews. We have what I learned this week. We have all formats. I've been posting my training workouts. Basically, if you want a lesson plan to kick today's butt and tomorrow's butt and the next day's butt, charliespaniard.com. Subscribe to the Spaniard Show on iTunes or whatever podcast app, and connect on social media. I'm a geek at heart, and I want to talk about books at Charlie Spaniard on social media. See you, my friends. Read a book. Okay, we got 8 minutes. Plenty of time. Plenty of time. Plenty of time. All right, folks. I'll be back here tomorrow morning with AM Excellence 603. Like I said, I've said multiple times, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes, etc. You're going to get a daily dose of wisdom. That's what you're going to get. Wisdom, entertainment, inspiration, motivation, know-how, all of it. Spaniard Show on iTunes. I'll see you all tomorrow morning.